My name is Anne, and if you're imagining a high-powered executive confidently navigating boardrooms in sharp designer heels, let me stop you right there. That's not me, not even close. Sure, my father is a towering figure in the business world, the kind of man whose company is so vast and sprawling it practically deserves its own zip code. And yes, my education came with a price tag that could make your jaw drop, but none of that ever translated into me yearning for a plush corner office or plodding my way up the corporate ladder. Instead, I've always gravitated toward the simplicity of a modest cubicle, tucked away from the whirlwind of corporate ambition. There's a kind of comfort in being behind the scenes, away from the relentless spotlight. Of course, this was not the vision my family had for me. In their eyes, I was supposed to follow a much grander path, one that echoed the legacy my father had spent a lifetime building. My brother, Leanne, fits the mold perfectly. He's the quintessential golden child. From a young age, he was groomed to take over the family empire, wearing that mantle of responsibility like it was tailored just for him. Meanwhile, I made it abundantly clear that this life, this empire, wasn't for me. I've never been one for the cutthroat drama of leadership or the suffocating pressure of living up to those kinds of expectations. And then there's Cannon. Picture this, a dimly lit bar that's seen better days, the kind of place where the floors creak, and the jukebox is always slightly off-key. I was there, unwinding with a group of friends, when he walked in. Cannon wasn't flashy, he wasn't trying to be. He carried a tray with an ease that spoke volumes about who he was, grounded, unpretentious, and refreshingly real. His smile, though, it was the kind of smile that made you pause, like the world had hit the brakes for just a moment. He was just a waiter, sure, but there was something disarmingly genuine about him. We struck up a conversation, and before long, it was clear that we just clicked. The more we talked, the more I realized how much we had in common, our hobbies, our values, our perspectives on life. While my world had always been saturated with the pursuit of power and prestige, Cannon's was built on something far simpler, yet infinitely more meaningful: authenticity. When my family found out about him, it was as though I had dropped a bombshell. A waiter? They repeated, their voices tinged with disbelief, as though I had brought home a creature from another planet. To them, Cannon was just a passing fancy, a fleeting distraction from the life they believed I was destined for. But to me, he was everything. He's real, I told them, my voice firm despite the sinking feeling in my chest. He understands me. My arguments were met with thinly veiled amusement from my parents, as though I was a naive child playing a game I didn't fully understand. My father, ever the pragmatist, didn't bother hiding his disappointment. You're throwing your life away, he said, his tone heavy with frustration. You can't build a future playing house with a boy who serves drinks. But Cannon wasn't just a boy who served drinks. He was a man who saw life differently, someone who didn't measure success in dollar signs or boardroom victories. He valued moments, relationships, and the beauty of simply existing in the present, and that was exactly what I wanted. Cannon's proposal was as straightforward as he was: no grand gestures, no over-the-top theatrics, just an honest, heartfelt, "Marry me." For a moment, I was stunned by the simplicity of it, but then everything clicked. Yes, I said, the word leaving my lips with a certainty I hadn't felt about anything in years. What followed was a whirlwind of decisions and plans. We didn't even bring Cannon to meet my family before we tied the knot. Impulsive? Maybe, but for us, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The wedding was modest, a far cry from the elaborate ceremonies my family was accustomed to. Close friends and family gathered for an intimate celebration, while my father, the titan of industry, sat in the front row, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. I couldn't blame him. This wasn't the future he had envisioned for me. Still, he showed up. After the ceremony, he pulled me aside. His expression was unreadable, his tone gruff as he muttered a single word: congratulations. It wasn't the warm embrace or glowing endorsement I might have secretly hoped for, but coming from him, it meant more than he probably realized. And so, Cannon and I began our life together. Against all odds and every expectation, we forged a union built on love, trust, and a little bit of defiance. It wasn't perfect, and it certainly wasn't what my family had planned for me, but it was ours. Sometimes, life isn't about following the path laid out for you, it's about carving your own, no matter how unconventional it may seem, and with Cannon by my side, I was ready to do just that. I tried to reassure him, my voice soft and steady. attempting to diffuse the tension that hung heavy between us. As I reached for his hand, hoping to bridge the widening gap, he pulled back, not in anger but with a gentleness that revealed something far deeper, a vulnerable kind of hurt. "It's really difficult, you know," he admitted, his eyes fixed on some distant point in the room, avoiding mine. "I always feel like an outsider, even when I'm here with you." His words struck me like a sharp gust of cold air, leaving me momentarily breathless. I opened my mouth to respond, to offer some comforting reassurance, but the truth was, I didn't know what to say. Our conversation lingered, unresolved, like a thread stretched too tightly, threatening to snap. The rift between us wasn't just emotional, it was the undeniable clash of our worlds, his struggles to navigate the unspoken expectations of my family and the growing disconnect between us. The unresolved issues loomed like a precarious cocktail, volatile and dangerously unpredictable. In the sanctuary of our small apartment, life seemed to regain a semblance of normalcy, or so I thought. For a while, we fell back into our routines, though they felt more mechanical than natural. Weeks blurred into months, and gradually, Cannon's presence began to fade like a watercolor painting left too long in the rain. His absences stretched longer, and when he was home, the silence between us spoke louder than words. Our once cozy apartment began to feel abandoned, a place marked by the debris of his chaotic mornings and late nights, discarded laundry in corners, dishes neglected in the sink, and the hollow echo of conversations we no longer had. Whenever I questioned him, his response was always the same: "Work's overwhelming, you know how it goes," he'd say, avoiding my gaze. His words sounded rehearsed, like a line he'd practiced too many times, and though I wanted to believe him, a nagging doubt had already taken root in my mind. Feeling isolated and uncertain, I decided to confide in Ryden, an old family friend who was like an uncle to me. As the head of security at my father's firm, Ryden had always been someone I could rely on for advice and help. "Ryden," I began hesitantly, twisting my fingers nervously, "I'm worried about Cannon, something doesn't feel right. Can you keep an eye on him for a while?" Ryden's expression turned serious, his voice steady and reassuring. "Of course, don't worry, Anne, I'll handle it." What Ryden uncovered shattered me. Cannon wasn't just buried in work, he was involved in an affair. The other woman, a striking figure of wealth and privilege, frequented the same circles Cannon had begun to gravitate toward. Her life, brimming with opulence, was a glaring contrast to the simplicity I had always embraced. The irony was brutal. Cannon, who once found my modest lifestyle endearing, was now captivated by the very world I had rejected. Armed with undeniable evidence, I confronted him one evening. I laid the photos on the table, each one a damning testament to his betrayal. His face, usually so composed, faltered for a brief moment before hardening into a mask of defiance. "So what?" he snapped, his voice laced with venom. "Yes, she's driven, youthful, stunning, everything you're not." His words cut deeper than I expected, each one a lash against the fragile hope I'd clung to. In that moment, the man I had once loved, the man I thought I knew, became a stranger. "I want a divorce," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. He laughed bitterly, a mocking sound that echoed through the room. But then, as the weight of my words sank in, his laughter faded. "Fine," he muttered, his tone resigned. And just like that, it was over. The divorce unfolded in a blur of paperwork and silent meals, each of us lost in our own thoughts. When it was finalized, Cannon packed his things and left, taking with him the remnants of our life together. The emptiness he left behind was suffocating, a void filled with betrayal and grief. When I told my parents about the divorce, their reaction surprised me. My father, never one to sugarcoat his opinions, spoke bluntly. "We never understood what you saw in him," he said, his tone tinged with relief rather than sadness. Looking back, I knew they were right. The distance between Cannon and me had been insurmountable long before the affair. His betrayal was merely the final fracture in a relationship already worn thin. But Cannon wasn't done with me, not entirely. He resurfaced months later, under different aliases and with the same tired lines, as if trying to rewrite our story. I reached out to Ryden again, knowing I could count on him. "Ryden, I need you to keep tabs on Cannon. Something tells me he's not as put together as he wants people to think." Ryden's findings confirmed my suspicions. Cannon's extravagant lifestyle was a facade. The luxury cars were rentals, the lavish trips funded by his new wife's bank account. He was chasing a dream of wealth and status, mistaking glitter for gold. As I flipped through Ryden's report, I felt an unexpected sense of closure. Cannon's life was a hollow performance, a far cry from the authenticity he once claimed to value. Months later, at a networking event, I saw him again. Cannon, arm in arm with his new wife, strutted through the room, projecting an air of confidence. When he spotted me, he whispered something to her, loud enough for me to hear. "That's my ex-wife, she never really amounted to much." His words stung, but only briefly. Before I could respond, an older gentleman stepped forward, his voice booming. "Young man, do you know who she is? She's the CEO of her father's company and a highly respected figure in this industry." Cannon's smirk disappeared, replaced by a stunned silence. His wife, once amused, now looked mortified. As I walked away from the scene, I felt a sense of liberation. Cannon's opinion no longer mattered. I had built a life for myself, a life rooted in strength, resilience, and authenticity. And somewhere along the way, I met someone new, Jack. Jack was everything Cannon wasn't: genuine, kind, and grounded. Over coffee, we found a connection built on mutual respect and shared values. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly seen. Life had come full circle, and as I stood on the threshold of this new chapter, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be.